not just similar, but just there's like a sense of wonder that you get out of those things.
Right.
And then there's a term called generative art, like art that makes other people want to make art, right? And then you find out that there's a tribe out there. There's a lot of people that do this, and then there's whole industries that are comprised of makers and visionaries, and then you start to realize, or at least I came to this realization, that everything has art in it to some extent, like the apps on your phone, all that stuff. If it's not, and this I guess is a discussion between art and design. If something is not designed well, you won't use it. It doesn't function well, and art and design are very closely linked. I think I would say that really the fundamental difference, and this bears definition. There will be all kinds of definitions for it, but the way that I see that is that art does not necessarily have to be functional. It's just something that we experience and can take joy in. Whereas design has a much more clear focus on its utility, like what it's for, right?
Sure.
But ultimately, they're the same principles, the same driving principles behind them. And so once I kind of had that realization that, like, oh, this is art is in everything, so there must be a lot of people out there designing, creating, and so kind of bringing this full circle to the question, you get into these circles and into these industries, and then you start to hear similar stories, right? Like people who were inspired by something, like I was inspired by films and games. Really just had to do something with that, right? Like had to make something out of that. And then you get into those industries, and I'm not saying that it's all bad or all good, but there's certainly other aspects at play. It's business. There's that creativity and like creating that thing that inspires and that we enjoy. That sometimes plays second fiddle to risk aversion, like what we know is going to do well and sell. And this is where I'm getting around to, you hear the same things over and over and over. These artists who want to create and want to inspire and want to like reignite that spark or that magic that got them into it. But
real life kind of gets in the way of that.
Right. The reality of selling it. And so that's like I don't know, to me that seems like a lifelong negotiation. Right? It's the creator and then or rather like the speaker and the audience and the relationship between the two. You can't just say whatever you want and expect everyone to love it.
Right.
You can't just say what you expect people will want to hear. Like that's not going to work either. And so you really have to have real substantial content to share with people that they want to receive, and to do it to execute it in a way that it's well received, right?
Yeah.
And that takes time and substance and effort. And there are
which a lot of people probably don't have to give at the end of their job, right?
And not every company that has resources to invest is willing to put the risk into discovering that thing, right? If there's already a formula for what works, then we just do that, right? So anyway, I think that's partly, that's a huge part of what inspired Art Skirmish to get off the ground in the first place. I just kept hearing, I've said this before, to you and to some others, like I kept hearing young artists wanting to get in.
Yeah.
And experienced artists wanting to get out.
And
I'm like, these people are not that different. They're just on
Right.
the opposite ends of like
What they've experienced,
yeah.
something happened in between there to burn them out. And Art Skirmish is hopefully it's nothing. No one thing could ever be a cure-all, but maybe part of the solution to provide artists. I hate to use the expression "safe space," but
the format.
The format, yeah.
The format. Yeah, I think that's the thing that we explored and kind of came around to as we had these discussions.
Right.
I was talking about different communities and these different sentiments that I was hearing, and Silas and I kind of mulled over these, and one of the things that we had talked about early on was other places where this sort of thing is being done, and I don't think we found anything that was quite like what we're doing. There's a lot of similar things,
Right.
or different elements, but it's kind of a combination of what I see going on and what my experience tells me will actually work, right?
Yeah.
And
And so, jumping in here, what is it that you do? Because obviously you are a professional artist. Can you give us a little bit about your background and where you're coming from?
yeah, so I'm a concept artist and illustrator. I work primarily in games, though I've been working freelance for a very long time. So I will do whatever comes up, whatever comes up, and I want to do, want to take on. But the way that I look at it is, because it's such a broad spectrum of what's asked of me. Really, what it is it is a visual or a design problem that a customer has, and my whole job is to figure out exactly what they're trying to solve through this medium, and then come up with a solution for them. That's a different it's a different framework than just saying like I make art for art's sake, or I want to make beautiful things. It's more understanding the utility in what the customer wants and why they're willing to pay you, and that is they've got a problem that you can solve.
Sure.
Right. And so a lot of times that ends up being video games, because that's kind of where I got in, and what I really enjoyed. Starting out, that's what I wanted to do. Right now, I'm just kind of doing like warm-ups. So I started with some shapes here, and then I kind of felt like that'd be an interesting head.
Okay.
And then this is just kind of a heavy character over here, some bird shapes, some faces, So at this point, I'm just kind of loosening up. And you want to work kind of quickly. You want to like not stress too much over it. And so you can see here, like I started making this bird, and I get a little bit tight on the shapes. By tight I mean you feel like I've got to make sure this is right, rather than just like freely going. And once you loosen up and you start going a little more freely, like things just look better. And partly that's just the actual movement of your arm is much more unconstrained, and so you actually get like smoother arcs. And there is a kind of a philosophy to drawing where your mark making, you can almost think about it like calligraphy, in writing, where like if everything's kind of at the same angle, it has this nice flow to it.
Right.
Or if they all converge to the same point, and so it helps with that sort of thing. And that's more of an abstract, just marks on the page rather than what it represents. I don't know if you've had the experience where you like you start drawing something, you draw a face, and then you start drawing the rest of the body, and the face is like really tiny, and the head's like way too big. And,
Yes.
You've got
definitely.
Yeah, because it's the big picture thing that's got to work first, and then you fill it in from there. And so what I'm doing here is I'm working with these grayscale markers. So I start with a light gray, and just kind of sketch loosely, and then I'm going to come in with a little darker gray and like fix things that are bothering me, right?
You say fix things. You can only fix things so much because you're doing it in ink, right?
Yeah, and that's actually kind of an interesting point as far as the practice of doing something that is permanent that you can't undo. So ink, especially this process, has an interesting output. That is like you have those permanent marks. You have to live with them, and yet you can build it up slowly. And so as you build it up, I say fix things. That's a way of working that I've enjoyed, where you get some marks on the page, and as you do that, your subconscious is just going to tell you like that's wrong, or this, this part's cool looking, So it gives you really quick feedback on like less of that, more of this.
Sure.
Right. And if you think about like writer's block, like, well, what am I supposed to draw, right? Well, just start getting things down, and then you have to respond to it. For me, I find that to be really refreshing. Like, it's just, again, it kind of comes back to that art skirmish mentality. Just start.
Just do it.
Get something on the page, and like, then you can see and assess and make better decisions. And so, that's typically how I approach drawing. And by the time you're coming around to the darker inks, you should be a little bit more loosened up, in theory. And your mark making should be a little bit more interesting.
So we know a little bit about where you are now, but obviously you didn't start there. You've been drawing ever since you were a child, I would imagine. Can you talk to us a little bit about your journey, starting from sketching on notebook paper and going forward from there?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because whenever that topic comes up, like, so, how did you learn, whatever, and then like the temptation to go back to like when I was 3 years old. Like, no, I didn't want the whole story. Just like tell me where you went to school or whatever, But yeah, I drew a lot when I was a kid.
What did you draw?
I drew. I like to draw tanks, which is not unusual given what I do now.
And did you copy them out of shows that you watched or comics that you read? Or?
I think, as I recall it, I would draw with my brothers, and my brothers, I was the youngest. And so they would just kind of tell me, like, oh, this is how you draw, a P-51 Mustang.
Okay.
I think they were the ones who were more interested in the actual, because I remember my brother Dave, he had like an aviation, military aviation book. And it was super cool. It was like, you crack it open and then you get like this full page of the aircraft in the same view where it's like front on, extreme perspective. And then it's got like all the breakouts of the things. And then I think it would give you some smaller like side views and stuff.
Yeah.
So again, with like generative art, the artwork that makes you want to make art, like that was definitely one of those. You see these machines, and by themselves, just what flight is inspiring.
Yeah.
Right. And so I remember that book that my brother had, and I may have copied a couple of those, but I remember this was like just like a part of our lives where we had this we had different countries, imaginary countries named after ourselves that we were the dictators of, and so it'd be like, well, the Davica is attacking Erica. They're like, well, we have submarines, and well, we've got jets, and so like we would draw all these things out,
Okay.
It's ridiculous, but and also kind of interesting that like, yeah, we always had this like military theme going on throughout our childhood, it's a certain fascination with it, you know.
That's interesting. And so you went from sketching machines of different kind, and was there a moment in whether it was growing up or in middle or high school where you realized this is what I want to do for a career?
Yeah, was there one moment? My other brother, Josh, he and I started modding this video game. It was Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight. Old game.
What is modding?
Yeah, so you buy a video game for PC typically, and then you just start going into the files and like seeing what you can change.
Oh, okay.
And so you generally are going to find tools that help you do that, you know. So games end up being kind of on this similar engines or platforms that run all the logic. And so today, you know, those engines would be like the Unreal Engine, Unity, that sort of thing. Back then, it was more common to have like a proprietary engine, like a company would make their own.
Got it.
But if it was built off a similar architecture, then people would figure that out and be like, well, okay, this is how you make your own custom map or your own custom character or custom weapon or whatever. So like Half-Life was one that a lot of people modified. Quake 2 was one that people modified. So it was around the time of Quake 2. My brother and I were modding Jedi Knight. And we started with making levels. That was like the most common thing that you could do, and you could share them pretty easily with other people online and then play these in like multiplayer matches. So that was like it's really kind of an interesting culture because it's part gamer playing, and you want to like, you know, the challenges and like beating the other person.
Right.
But then there's this whole new level of competition of like, I made the coolest, most fun, most interesting level that everyone else wants to play.
Right, know? Right.
And so I think part of my mentality and what got me into art came from that. And it had to, you know, because that was like a formative years of my life when I got into that. And so my brother and I modded this game. And it goes from like, okay, you can do levels, and then, oh, well, what if we could do our own characters? What if we do our own weapons? What if we do our own, like, you know, logic in the game? So it's not even the same game anymore. It's just
right.
Like something different, you know. That's what they would generally call a total conversion, you know. So there's a mod that's like you play the game, but some things are modified. Mm-hmm. A total conversion is like we took this game platform, we replaced everything, so you're playing something else.
That's interesting.
You know.
And so you got into that, and in order to do these mods or these, what was the other term?
Total conversion.
The total conversions, you had to actually create some of the elements.
Yeah, and so then you just take it one step at a time. It's like, well, I can make a level that's just like I put blocks for the floor and for the walls, and then, okay, how do I get a doorway to open? So, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then it's like, well, I want to texture this level. I don't want it to all be bricks. Like I want it to be sci-fi or whatever, you know?
Right.
And so then you start learning how to paint on just flat surfaces to give the illusion of depth and texture and all that stuff. And that's where I started, and that's actually what I wanted to do when I got into the games industry. I thought I was going to be a texture artist.
Interesting. And that's a job? That's
at the time.
Do? Okay.
At the time it was. I mean, it is a specialty you could be in now, but it's more common for that to be combined with other work. And then also a lot of it is, there definitely is a job there, but a lot of that is like it's done to a level where there's libraries you can just buy. And then
okay, got it.
A bunch of things, you know.
So you didn't end up in texture artists, but this kind of piqued your interest in somehow being involved in video games. and some in the art part of video games, not the coding part. Even though you kind of had to get into the coding a little bit, it sounds like, to get this.
I
mods
tried.
done.
Yeah, and then that you differentiate coding and scripting. Scripting is where you kind of have a more custom language for the game. So certain functions have already kind of been worked out, like opening and closing a door.
Right.
So it's just like a one line rather than like a whole bunch of lines of deeper code.
Right.
So I never did any of that. I dabbled with scripting, but I can't make any claim to being really a technical artist in any way. That wasn't my thing.
And so you got into this piqued your interest, and eventually you'd get some formal training. How did that? Where did you end up getting that training, and how did that come about?
So before the formal training was some direct, I guess you'd call it like apprenticeship in a way. I got an internship at a company called Garage Games that they made tools to create video games. They made the game engines. They had what was called the Torque engine, which was like the it was the engine that the game Tribes 2 ran on. Well, anyway.
So you were able to get this internship without going through any kind of art or technical school?
Because of the modding.
Okay, so you showed them a portfolio of your mods, and they said that you're doing impressive enough work to merit an internship.
Yeah, and it was a small enough company.
Yeah.
So I get there, and I'm thinking that I'm going to be the texture guy, which I have that website, thetextureguy.com.
Oh, okay.
From those days, I was going to be the texture guy. And
is that a live URL?
It'll go to ericowellart.com.
Oh, okay.
It'll just redirect you. So I thought I was going to be doing textures, and I got started on it, and they're like, well, you really need to learn how to draw. I drew and stuff as a kid, but like I didn't know how to draw. Like I drew my like characters, my little shorthand. Like I said, my brothers would be like, hey, this is how you draw a tank, and so like I would do that.
Right. So at this point, you're just doing modding. That's you know how to do modding, you know how to do textures within video games, but you really don't know, like if you wanted to create a character like a Master Chief from Halo.
I had no
you couldn't draw that.
No.
Like okay.
No way. In fact, I could probably eventually we could pull up some drawings from that era, and they're bad. Like they're really bad. Yeah, I was actually I was half decent at painting textures.
Okay.
But most of that was like you get the effect or the illusion, and sometimes you could source photos or like riff off of something else.
Right.
And everything then was like, well, the quality bar was much lower. The standard was much lower for everything. So I felt like I was doing pretty good. Well, that's because the limitations kind of cap it out, right?
Right.
And so anyway, I get to intern at that place, and it was really beneficial for me because it was a small enough place that you could get to know people, and I wasn't just a gopher to get coffee for people. It was they actually but no, they had the humanity and respect to say like, oh, you came all the way out here, like, well.
West Coast, right?
Yeah,
we're on the East Coast here, by the way. And so
yeah.
All the way out to the West Coast to do this internship. It's 19, is that right?
Yeah, 19 years old.
Yeah.
I was an idiot, but anyway, just young and naive. But anyway, so you were asked about where did I learn? That's where I'd say the learning really started. Like I did learn a few things online with the modding stuff. You'd find a community where you can ask questions and learn things, and a lot of that is kind of figuring things out on your own. But the relationship between like trying to figure something out on your own and like having someone with some experience and wisdom to direct you and also to motivate you. So I remember some of these conversations. The one was about really just the necessity of drawing. and some very basic. I mean, I'm 19 years old, intern at a video game company, supposed to be making art, and I'm getting like the most basic lessons on the whiteboard. Like, okay, these are your value ranges. You've got black and white and the whole grayscale in between, and the more of that range you put in there, the more kind of eye-popping and contrast it is.
It's amazing that you got the internship if they had to explain all these things. I mean, it is. It's remarkable.
Yeah.
It means you must have had a great portfolio, or at least, impressive enough for your age. Yeah, wow. So you're getting some, like, fundamentals, like Art 101 there at the internship.
And then I think my takeaway when I left was, I remember the art director, Joe Maroshak was his name. He encouraged me in the, kind of tough love kind of way.
Right.
He was telling me about this painter that he knew who, I guess her mantra was, the first 3 miles of paint don't count. Like,
wow.
You gotta put in the work and the time and the mileage. And so he told me, practically, he said, well, go to Walmart, get a tote and a ream of paper and draw for an hour every night and throw it in the tote and forget about it. And so that's what I did when I worked there.
Okay.
Just tons of bad drawings,
Yeah.
But,
nothing can beat the reps.
Yeah, exactly. And,
as long as the reps are doing the right thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's another, there's a piano teacher who used to live like a house up from here. That was his mantra was, practice does not make perfect. How did he word it? It was like
practice makes permanent.
Yeah, I think the way he described it was correct practice makes perfect.
Yeah. I had a sports coach who said it's perfect practice makes perfect. Yeah. So you have this internship. You're learning a ton. That ends. It does not result in a job. I know that's a story in and of itself. But then you come back. East. Mm-hmm. And do you find a job as an artist right away?
No. I looked around a couple places, and I was, honestly, at that point, I was content to I'll do design at like a T-shirt place or whatever, And I actually applied to some of these places, and they're just like, yeah, you're not going to be happy here.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Which actually I appreciate that rejection, years later.
Yeah. Doing screen art, there's right, because there's a big difference between screen art and video game design. Yeah.
So then I contracted a little bit. One of the things that worked in my favor, whenever you go and meet somebody or you work someplace, those are connections that could stick with you for a long time. And so a number of the artists that I had worked with there ended up moving on to other studios, and that's where I found a lot of my work at the beginning, and part of it is, people throwing each other a bone, like, oh, Eric's trying to get a start.
Yeah, sure.
And, here's something he could do to
give you a leg up.
Yeah.
And that was all on a contract basis, like part-time contract.
Mm-hmm. And that wasn't enough, definitely not enough to pay the bills. So I was looking around for different work. When I interned at Garage Games, I was adamant, and I think this is partly like just where I came from or something, I don't know, but I was just adamant that I was not going to go to school, that was a waste of time, that I could do all this stuff on my own, figure it out, put the miles in, that sort of thing.
Sure.
And I think some people both encourage that, but then also talk some sense into it. Like, you don't have to go to school. And I just took that, at that age, you take that as like, I'm right.
Right. Didn't listen to the second part of the sentence, right?
But you might be a whole lot better off if you do. Well, my takeaway, I'll try to be succinct with this, but like my takeaway from that was, if you go into the workforce before you go into education, you have a much better idea of what you want out of the education and how it's going to benefit you in the real world, because you've been in it. And that was, I'd say that was pretty much my experience. You know, at first I tried to do it on my own, which meant kind of putting in the reps. And a lot of that was good, but I think you kind of cap out at some point. And we were just talking earlier before we got on the stream here about how you really just cannot replace the kind of the group social dynamic, you know, just the power of having other people along, you know, for the journey and for
Right.
Invested in the in your success, right? Well, even just invested in caring about similar things, you know.
Sure. Yeah, no one wants to feel out on an island doing whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you went from, so you started getting some contract work, and then little things, and this was in the video game industry?
Yes.
Okay.
All pretty much in the indie space.
Okay.
At the time, that was not as popular as it is now. So, you know, for those that don't know what I'm talking about there, you kind of have a kind of a bigger business structure in video games. You know, some of these video game companies are just absolutely huge, to the level of like multi levels. They own other companies,
Right,
you know,
right.
And then some are smaller. And at the time, that was, you know, you could be like a small startup, and you know, virtually everybody started there, but you did have bigger operations kind of running the show, and then like the small guys, like just somebody making a game at home or something, like that was, honestly, they kind of mocked it, you know.
Sure.
And I thought it was cool though, because I thought, you know, these are people who are doing what they want to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And now it's
Instead of what a corporation demands has to be done.
right. And now it's much more popular. In fact,
Easier too, right?
yeah, I mean, it's almost an element of the culture and the industry now, you know. And there are reasons for that, but yeah. So that's where a lot of the work came from early on.
Okay. And then you're going along, you're paying the bills, doing other types of work as well. And then now obviously you're able to support yourself as a full-time artist. So where did that come from? How were you able to go from part-time indie games to what you do now?
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of a long journey, but you know, early on I wasn't able to keep the momentum, and I applied at a couple different places. I applied to some art studios. By art studios, I mean video game studios, and you know, set up for an interview with one place that I thought would be pretty cool, and I had like 3 options on the table at the time. I remember I was applying to studios, and I had one, you know, only one that responded to me, and then I had a friend who was moving out west who did like mountain biking as like a trail guide.
Yeah.
You know, and so there was an opportunity there. And then my brother had just gotten out of the Marine Corps and went to work at Sikorsky, which is a helicopter manufacturer. And they had built a new facility, and they had to staff it, right? And so those were like my 3 things that, you know, one was the one that I wanted to do, and then the other 2 were like friends and family who were like, hey, there's an opportunity here, you know.
Sure.
So the interview fell through, like basically the day of or the day before. They reached out and said, oh, well, actually we found somebody else, you know, so never mind.
Got it.
And then I I ended up applying to the helicopter factory, and the reason for that was they had an employee scholarship program where they would pay for your school. They paid 100%. They'd even give you paid time off,
Wow.
to go to school.
Wow.
It was like 3 hours a week or something, but still,
That's
I'm
a
getting
lot.
paid
That's a
3
great
hours a
benefit.
week to go to school.
Yeah. Yeah.
As opposed to paying for it.
Sure.
And so I thought, okay, that sounds pretty awesome. So I applied there. There's a much longer story there, but I got the job. What's that?
And you started in art school.
Yeah, I asked.
Were you full-time credits?
No,
Okay.
no, because they would limit how much. I'm trying to remember how it worked. They would pay for class. They pay 100%, but I think they kind of capped you out on how many credit hours you could take because you have to go to work.
Right.
I seem to remember taking 6 credit hours, probably max. I might have taken 9, but I think typically I was taking 2 3-hour classes.
And what school was that?
Yeah, so I asked around to artists that I knew. I said, if you could go anywhere you wanted, where would it go, or where would you go? And at the time, it was a good school when I went. So I'll say that, but that was a long time ago. So this is not a full endorsement, but at the time, people told me that Academy of Art was the place to go, and that's a school in San Francisco. They had an online program, and I'll definitely say, vouching for their online program. I've been to a couple other schools since then.
Yeah,
that was far and above like the best online experience I've ever had.
Sure.
Just really well presented and organized, and things just made sense, which it turns out is not the norm.
Okay.
So yeah, and the quality of the instructors was great. So I took classes, and like I said, I kind of took them bite size. Like I didn't do the full full load because I could only manage so much with working a full-time job at the factory. And so anyway, kind of coming back around, I had done some concept freelancing while I was working at the factory. I would do that on the side, and eventually the factory shut down. They laid us all off, right? And it was around that time. It's a crazy story, and there's so much more to it. But like, my wife and I had just closed on a house, and it was like 2 weeks later they announced the layoffs.
Oh man!
And we're like, and there's a whole big story around that, and really feeling like God provided something for us in that house, and then feeling like, okay, I guess we're here for a reason, because we just got this place. How we got the house was that alone was like kind of a crazy story, but then and then getting laid off like right after that, it's like, okay, I think we're like supposed to be here.
Yeah.
I don't really know what that means, but it seems clear, right?
Yeah.
And so then, adding to like the too many things lining up to be coincidence, it was like right at that time, a company, an indie company that I had, I'd done a contract for right after I left my internship. I put my resume up online and my portfolio, and I worked with these guys for a couple of months working on this game called Realm of Empires. It was a back when Facebook used to publish games on Facebook rather than on Oculus or whatever,
Right.
This was like a massive multiplayer medieval castle, strategy.
I never played a game on Facebook ever.
No, really?
No, I didn't even know that existed until you said it just now.
Well, it's funny because it added this social element to games that now is kind of linked.
You think that goes back to Facebook games, or?
Well, games have always been social to a degree. I mean,
Yeah, sure.
Chess, everything. You got to play with somebody. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then you start clubs and all that sort of thing. But this, well, I'll say
Because Xbox Live is already a thing at that point, and
yeah, but it exploited it in a new way.
okay,
It was like games started to be structured around the fact that you already had this network of friends.
yeah, sure,
And that it was going to be on Facebook. So
sure,
so we didn't do this, but there was a competitor game that had this setup where like you had heroes in your kingdom they were knights,
right,
and they were basically your friends that you got convinced to play the game. Or so I can't remember how they did it. It was like you could set them up and be like, okay, so we're Facebook friends. Silas is my chief knight, right?
I see.
And you don't play the game yet, but you'll get these notifications about like
you bait them in socially, put social pressure on them.
yes, exactly. Yeah. So it started doing that sort of
Okay.
thing. Ultimately, I think it was perhaps too bloated or just too much for them to moderate everything, and kind of Facebook did away with that.
Okay.
I don't know if it still exists on Facebook.
Probably got all the AI data they needed from it.
Yeah, exactly. We got what we came for. So anyway, I did a contract for this company. Excuse me. They reached back out to me. This is years later. I worked for the factory for 3 years. I did a couple of contracts for them. Like I made like new maps and a couple new characters or whatever.
Yeah.
Little updates. And then like right after I got laid off, I went back to school. While like kind of in the interim, having gotten laid off, because I didn't finish any degree. Like
Okay.
I took a bunch of art classes, but I'm like, well, if I take another year of school, I'll have a associate's degree.
Sure.
So so I got set up to go to a community college after I got laid off. But anyway, in that time, BDA, the company that made Realm of Empires, they called me up and said, hey, we want to rebuild the game. We want to put it on mobile phones. And as a part of that, we're going to basically completely remake the desktop version of it. We're going to get off of Facebook and make our own platform for it and get on some other publishers. So it was like, it ended up being like 5 more years of work.
Wow.
Yeah, so I worked for those guys for like
Wow.
a really long
Not
time.
full time?
Yes.
Full time for 5 years.
Yeah. And so that was kind of interesting. I mean, it was indie, so the pay was not, it was enough to live on. And then
We're getting rich.
I was not getting rich, no. And the more I worked with them, and it was everything was what's the term? Amicable, right? Like, I love those guys. They're great.
Yeah.
But it did get to the point where I was like, you know what? I think I'm a better artist than I was. I all told, the factory time, the part-time work, the full-time work, I think it was 8 years.
Wow.
Like, I'm a different artist than the one you were hiring, 8 years ago.
Right.
So we need to renegotiate. And we did. And they were very good about it. But it was clear that it couldn't last,
Yeah.
And
You basically priced yourself out of that particular company.
yes. There were other factors going on. I mean, the game, like I said, at 8 years, that's a really long time for a game.
Sure.
And so I think it's remarkable that the game went on that long, and it still does have a following to this day, but people will lose interest in anything over time. So I think it was just kind of the natural course of, like, we developed new content
Sure.
for it, and then it was clear, like, okay, I think we've kind of
Yeah.
hit our market, and
Yeah.
but
and now
yeah.
you have this practical experience in the video game industry as a professional, and you're able to take that and we're able to leverage that into more contracts, into another full-time gig.
Yeah, more contracts. I did some children's books after that, which is really different than games.
Yeah.
And one of my realizations after I was done with working on Realm of Empires, like I said, 8 years in total, and I had done some other contracts on the side. But one thing you find out is you really need to have that broad network. It's like I just leaned on this company for a long time, and then once that was done, I'm like, well, who do I know? You know, like,
Right.
and I knew a lot of people, but none of it was fresh. You know what I mean? So it was a challenge to get back into the next contract. The next one that I did actually was, you can almost always trace it back to something you did or someone you met.
Right.
And so the children's books that I did traced back to Garage Games, my internship there.
Oh,
it
wow.
was a Christian books publisher out in Eugene, Oregon, who knew some people that I had worked with. In fact, you know, it's strange how things work. The editor needed to find an illustrator for this project, so he reached out to someone that he knew who had interned at Garage Games after me
Interesting.
and knew about me mutually through the other artists. And he was like, well, I don't think I can do that, but you should contact this guy.
Wow.
Right. It's crazy. And so I did 4 books with them. And so that was challenging. It was cool to like do something different. And I've always been of the mindset that like the variety in work is really beneficial.
Yeah,
Because there's
sure.
like this cross training.
Right.
You know, it's like if you do different sports, you're gonna take things from one sport to the other.
Right.
And so I was generally interested in trying new things. And I would say the books were really challenging coming from concept art, because in concept art, it's all about that cool factor. It's all about like finding the design.
Right.
You know, like what I'm doing right now. I'm just like noodling around and drawing things. You know, if I had a prompt, it'd be a little more focused. I mean,
Sure.
it'd be a lot more focused. But if what your objective is to tell a story and the characters are already defined and you're going panel to panel,
Yeah.
like
Consistency is key.
same character, different emotion, different light, different context,
Right.
the relationship between things, that was the realization. Like when I had the realization that like, oh, I got pretty good at drawing one thing
Right.
in isolation, because the job would be to communicate this character or this crate or this weapon or whatever to a team so that they could build it out in 3D.
Right.
But it's one object,
Right.
and then to show like that character in relation to another character, like very simple thing would be they're talking, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, well, they're not quite lined up right, and like the facial expressions, like it doesn't look like they're having an interaction. It just looks
Right.
like two people on the page, you know, and you find like, oh, that's a whole different set of skills.
Sure.
And so, yeah, so that was a really humbling experience for me, because I went into it thinking like, I can paint.
Yeah.
I know how to paint. I've been painting for years.
This will be easy.
Yeah, look at all these games that I've, you know, and then I'm like, why is this so hard? You know?
Right. Starting over.
Yeah, it was a good thing.
And then from there, you were able to, and this is probably where we'll last stop, which kind of works with our timing in the episode here. From there, you've kind of entered the chapter that you're currently in, which is what?
Well, I'm still doing contract work in games, but I'm spending a lot more time developing my own intellectual properties. So Fantastic Tanks, Art Skirmish, and there's always a handful more. And actually, I touched on this earlier, that when I was at Sikorsky, I had a sketch or like a notebook, and I would just throw notes in the back and little sketches and stuff. All my ideas or things that I saw at Sikorsky that I was like, get some inspiration, or I think that's crazy, and you know, wanted to come up with some solution to it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So I'd write and draw all that stuff in the back. At some point, I realized like I'm just doing all this random stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compile it all in a Google Doc, and not all of it. I mean, like each individual idea. Mm-hmm. So like one idea was The Believer. This was based on a conversation with a guy at the factory. He was a very smart guy, When you meet people who are competent and on the level, they're like,
Sure.
they're tracking. One of these guys. But at the factory, we had to have safety goggles or safety glasses on and stuff. And with his corrective lenses and stuff, they were super thick. So he had like the big,
the Coke
bottle glasses.
lenses. Yeah.
And one night, we're on second shift. He starts talking to me about how, like, we're gonna have to go in the ocean, and like we're gonna have to mix our genes with dolphins and live in the ocean.
And he was serious.
I don't know. But I'm just like, I'm looking at this otherwise smart guy with Coke bottle glasses talking about like mixing genes with dolphins, and I'm like, this is awesome. This needs to be a story.
Okay.
So, and then there were a handful of other things at work, that
Scattered ideas here and there, little inspirations you've had.
Right. So then I would like do all my sketches for that.
Yeah.
And like my write up on just like, okay, what is the thing that I just told you? Let me just write that out. And then let me write out every other thought on this. And what ended up happening is I had a list of documents, and I could see like, oh, that's just barely a spark of an idea. Like I could only write like 3 sentences.
Right.
So in the back of your mind, you're like, yeah, I'm going to do that someday. And then when you put it on paper and you realize there's really not much there,
Right.
And then other ideas, it's like, actually, the content's just flowing, so this has more potential. And that's what I did. I started separating my ideas out like that. And Fantastic Tanks kind of rose to the top as the one that like people responded to really well. I could see how like I wanted to make sculptures out of that, and then I wanted to like learn 3D printing. I'm like, well, I already have this concept, and so
gave you a roadmap.
Yeah. So there's like a dozen ideas or more, but like at this point, trying to get to fewer fires in the iron, so that irons in the fire, so that I can actually do those well. So there's contract work, which takes up most of my time, and then the 2 main projects are Fantastic Tanks and Art Skirmish.
Great. Yeah. And looks like I guess finished wouldn't be the right word, but you've made some progress on your sketch there. So what I'm seeing is a robot guy, a few birds, and random people. Looks like one person with a blade for a head.
Oh, this one here?
Yes.
Yeah. So sometimes I'm thinking like, how do you do something unexpected? So I know it's going to be
blades for head would do that.
There. Well, just it's shapes really. Sometime we'll do an episode where we'll do like just random shapes, and we'll build heads out of them, build like characters out of them. That's what I used to do for Realm of Empires. I did all their like character portraits by just like doing random shapes, and then just like I was saying earlier, how you like respond to things.
Yeah.
You look at something and you'd be like, how in the world can that be a head? And you're like, well, okay, that shape could be like a big hat, right? And you start to respond to it, and then once you do, like it takes on this life and this character of its own, and to me that's like way more fun than this like predictable, so like this. Maybe we're starting to see some possibilities here. So it's like a dude with a big hat, right? And he's got this kind of flowing robe here.
Okay.
So anyway,
Yeah.
kind of.
Just ideas. You're expressing ideas, and then if you liked that, you could take it and do a whole sheet just fleshing that guy out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that brings us to about an hour of our podcast. So thanks for watching our first episode. We hope to be live every Tuesday, normally from about 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern. You can also see these podcasts after they're recorded. We'll edit them a bit and post them on YouTube and also Rumble. We're still working on getting our social media accounts. They are up. You can find us either as Real Art Skirmish or Art Skirmish on YouTube, Instagram, X, and Facebook. And you can see our handles in the description. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next week.